Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we are going to look at the anatomy of a walk cycle in Adobe Animate. Now, what we're going to learn today is a bit of a rite of passage for all animators, whether you're animating for 2D, 3D, film, TV, video games, you name it. The animated walk cycle crosses our path one point or another. So today we're going to kind of learn about a couple of different basic approaches that you can use to create a 2D walk cycle for various different outputs. So these techniques are, we're going to do them in Adobe Animate, but are cross-platform. So these will translate into 3D programs. These will translate into Toon Boom Harmony. These will translate into Photoshop and all sorts of others. So you can imagine that the theory behind this is kind of universal. So these are kind of the principles of a walk. So first, we're going to start by looking at a walk. Now, a walk is composed of various different positions. Now, we already know when it comes to animating, we have our keys, extremes, breakdowns, and in-betweens. And a walk is no different. A walk utilizes not only those different poses, but it also uses arcs to achieve movement. So here's kind of a breakdown of a character walk, but let's go ahead and look at some reference, because as we know, reference is really, really important. So as you can see here, a character walking, and this is just a simple like 140 frame walk. His arms are swinging, all the different parts, his legs, his body have followed through an overlapping action. Notice the movements and tilting in his shoulder and hips, as well as the bounce up and down he achieves to animate the walk as well. Now, by just simply changing some of these elements, you can get a totally different feel. So here you can see that this is a more angry stomp tempo. It takes a few more extra frames, but all the same functions are still there. So you have the follow through and overlapping action, especially with her ponytail, as well as her arms. You have the hip twisting and movement and so forth. So a walk is more than just a character walking on a straight line. We have to kind of think about all these different parts as we begin our study in the character walk. Otherwise, you're going to get a character that's flat, has no appeal, and almost looks like it's gliding across the screen. So this is a really good starting point. Now let's start with the extremes. In this case, our extremes are going to be our contact pose on either end. So we're going to kind of break down how to start a walk cycle by starting by just thinking about one single step. Now, a lot of you are going to notice and most likely look up examples online of walk cycles. And what you're going to see is a lot of walk cycles are illustrated like this picture before us. Now, this is a very good breakdown, but unfortunately, this picture is inaccurate. Now, the picture to the right of this really shows what a single step would look like. By spacing your character's feet this far apart, you're going to get drastic sliding, almost like the character is teleporting throughout the scene. But by lining up the heel, as you can see that the artist here, in this case Richard Williams, did, it makes it a little more appropriate. So here's another very common walk cycle chart that you can see is spaced out. And I oftentimes get students using this as reference, but forgetting to line up those heels when they draw their own cartoon on it. And I have some other examples of this as well. One of the most famous walk cycle sheets we're going to use as an example today is Preston Blair. And it's an amazing study in line of action, in gesture, and extreme poses. But unfortunately, again, this is not typically how we would animate. Our animation would look something like this. So we would have those clusters of frames where the heels and the toes hit, and then you can really see when all these, in this case, 25 pictures are threaded together, you can really see some amazing arcs happening, whether it's the knee, the arc of the arm and the elbow, or especially there, the arc of the head. And so all of these are our end product. The more pictures you have, obviously, the smoother it's going to be. And this is animated on thirds. So in other words, there's a main drawing every 3 frames and so forth. So first, let's discuss tempo. If we're going to talk about steps, we want to talk about tempo. So a single step of a character typically takes place within 12 frames. Now, I know what you're thinking. You see the number 13 up here a lot. Well, the idea is the last frame is kind of the starting point of the next step. So they're kind of the same. So Animators wouldn't break this up on 12s. They would actually use 13, and then they'd break it into 3 parts. So you have your contact, your passing, middle position, and your contact, which give you that kind of 13 frames. And you'll notice in this case, we have a drawing every 3 frames that Richard Williams has done. Now, the standard walk is on march time, and that's about the standard pacing of a walk is about 12 frames. If you're very slow, you may have a walk that takes 1 whole second for maybe an elderly person or somebody who has mobility challenges. That would take maybe about 24 seconds. 16 seconds is good for just kind of a slow, lazy walk, or pardon me, 16 frames. 16 frames is really important for that. Or if you're in a hurry, 8 frames would be more of a picking up the action walk as well. And you can see here, cartoon walks are typically on 8s, so 3 steps a second when you all add it up to that 24 frames a second. So kind of an interesting thing to think about when you're planning your walk. So the first thing you want to do is obviously gather a reference, but before you film that reference, think about like, what is your character's motivation? What is their age? How are their mobilities? What is their mindset? All of these will determine your walks, and thus in turn determine where you put those key poses, which will really help you kind of set up your timing and spacing in the long run. So let's hop into Adobe Animate. I have a few examples here for you. So you saw some of these great contact passing positions. As we take our first step, the characters typically take a down step. And then as they go from the passing position in this leg and this dark red knee flies upward, their head kind of bobs a little higher. That gives us this really lovely arc. There's a lot of other phrases that you'll hear these called. You'll hear these called recoil and high point oftentimes, but in the end, it's just really your up and down position. So think of these as your key poses and your breakdowns, for lack of a better way to say it. There are currently no in-betweens in here, but these are just your key poses. And the great thing is you can make these key poses in any program you want. You can use Photoshop, you can use Illustrator, you can sketch them on a piece of paper and scan them in. And it's really really easy, I should say, to get them into Adobe Animate. So let's eyeball off that reference, and let's kind of center our document here. And let's talk a little bit about this first style of animation. So the first style of animation that I have, as you can see, is I have just a basic, and let me unlock this layer and lock some of our other ones. I have a basic walk cycle where the character just kind of straight ahead kind of starts walking and kind of, this is on 3s again, walks off of the stage. So every 3 frames we have motion, and you can see when I turn on my onion skin here, you can kind of see the nice walkthrough of all of these. So we have some up and down movement. What I did with this is I drew these right here in Flash using the Flash pen tool. You'll also notice I marked some of my frames. So this is again a 2-step cycle. So this character takes 1 complete step on 12s, and then there's about 25 steps if you add those 12s. Really, it should be around 26, but that's okay if you add them together. So what I have right now is I've marked the frame by just simply clicking within the from keyframe to keyframe, and I actually called this one in this case contact. So if I say contact pose and hit enter, that's going to mark that for me. And I like to do this, especially if you're a beginner, because it kind of lets you know what's that supposed to be. So our passing pose in this character's case could be either of these frames in here, but I like this one right here, so I'm going to call it passing pose. Now this is not a necessity, but this is something you may want to do to keep yourself organized, to make sure that you don't, especially if you're copying and pasting from Illustrator into Animate right here, you don't want to accidentally paste your passing pose where the contact pose should be. So before I even put pictures in, what I'll necessarily do is go ahead, set my timing, and just, and how I would do that is I would essentially set a blank keyframe, and then I would hit my function. In my case, I have function turned on, but F5, and then I would hit F6 to set another blank keyframe, and I kind of just pace out those drawings. So when I do paste something in, I know what I'm going to paste into there. So if this is, let's see, which this one would be passing right here, essentially. I can go ahead before I even add a picture in here and say passing pose 3 in this case, and it's going to label that for me. So again, if you get confused easily, or I can imagine with a lot of drawings, organization can get a little tricky, go ahead and label these to start. Now you'll notice on the other layers, I don't necessarily do that. But what I've done here is kind of taken my character, and I have my character drawing here. It's all vector. Let's zoom into this little stick figure. And I've started by drawing my character pose out, and then usually I hop over to the passing pose. Now, one of the most important things here is where their heel is. So I'm going to go ahead and draw a layer guide. If you don't know how to do that, you simply would go to View, and you can turn on your rulers. You can also just right-click on your timeline, on your stage, and go to Rulers, and you can show grids and guides and all sorts of things. If you want to ever clear those guides, you can simply go into Clear Guides, and they'll go away. But the reason I usually put, if I'm going to have my character kind of walk off of the screen, I want to make sure, you can see in this case, I'm a little off, aren't I? So, when I put my drawing in, I'm going to use my arrow keys, and I just want to line up this area right here. And so, again, let me just add a new frame for notes. It's always good to do some cleanup and some notes. I'm just adding like a little mark where they're going to start. So now you can see the foot bending down, the foot picks up. Now, my foot in this case picks up, but I do not slide my character forward. At no point on this pose does this character go that way. I'm going to wait until they make contact, and then essentially just move my ruler guide over on that heel. And you can see I have a little bit of a shift, don't I? You see that shift? So as that occurs, I can say, okay, in this case, I'm going to move my guide back, and I'm going to move my passing pose back because I want that foot planted. Almost imagine that your character has like this giant spike coming through their heel, and when they step into the ground, it kind of plants their foot there. And so now, as we begin to refine that, it's going to actually look like our character is stepping off of that foot. You can see this one is extraordinarily off. So I'm going to just kind of do this, and let's hit enter to play it back. Yeah, now our character is a little more grounded. So at this point, you have a couple options here. You can go in and you can, use this layer. You can refine it. You can do all sorts of things. This could just be your sketch, and then you can do a refine layer, which I oftentimes will do. Get my brushes here, go to my tool, kind of play with the sizes. And then I may go in and simply lock this layer at this point. And then I may go in and, redraw. So if I didn't like my character, or if I had, and I'm going to show you some examples of how to actually get like a really defined character. So I can go in and I can sketch this up, or if I wanted that knee to be a little more bent, I can go in and do that, and so forth. So I sometimes will do a couple different pencil layer tests just to see, and again, all of these can just be turned on and off, that you may want to go in and refine it. So I'm going to delete that layer. But that's one way to do it. Now, having your character kind of walk off of a certain point it can be very helpful, but also what's going to happen is you're going to end up having a ton of pictures to draw. So, as you can see, as I continue to move forward here, and, if I kind of go into, let's see if I get my onion skinning to work here. Oh, that's because it's locked. If you lock your layers, by the way, your onion skin goes off. So just a happy little tip there. But you can see I have a lot of pictures to do. So unless I'm organized, if I just try to willy-nilly kind of guess, I can even use my onion skin for this. It's going to be a long day. So a lot of people don't like to do it this way. So I personally kind of like this straight ahead kind of style. You are using pose to pose, but you are pushing your character in the direction that you want to go. What the benefits of this are is, yes, the con is you have more, essentially more planning to do as you work. But the benefit is you won't have as much character foot sliding, which I'm going to show you in the next demo here using a walk cycle loop. So I have this kind of like homage to Preston Blair here, our little character. And this character is going to walk across the screen. So I'm going to hit enter. So you can see he's walking. And you see the slide. You see that slide right there? This happens. Now, I built this a little bit differently. How I built this character is actually created a clip. So if I go ahead and highlight the very first frame here, and if I can get into my library, it may be easier, and I double click on the walk, what you'll notice is I have our character. So in this case, what I've done is I've actually used my ruler guides like so, and I have the character just simply walking in place. So you can see it never really steps forward. It just kind of like cycles back and forth. This is a method you're going to see a lot in video game animation, where they have the character walk in place and then move them across the screen. The pros of this are you don't have to worry about translation right away. You can kind of focus, especially if you have a character like this, you can kind of focus in one specific area, and like you can notice your arcs that way. You can kind of just keep, drawing on top of one another. And that's a great benefit. Once you have this character, now in this case, my character is if I can get to it, has a motion tween on it. Lock layer. There we go. In this case, my character is actually a graphic symbol. So as we know, graphic symbols just repeat. And so what I've done here is, essentially how I started was I said insert new symbol. I called this walk. We already called that walk number 2. I made sure it was a graphic symbol. I hit OK. I have my timeline, and then I just get going, right? Typically, I'll draw my first character first, but if I get, and this one I think I drew in, I think it was Illustrator. So get in here, and I may just do a rough pass of my character. You have the shoulder. And so I'll get in here and start drawing, kind of figuring out my character, my S-curve. In this case, if this character had like their foot up, I could do that, and then their back foot. And again, everything starts as a rough sketch. I don't ever refine any animations, any drawings. Kind of just sketch it out a little bit. And then I go on to the next pose, and I'll do my passing. Now, the good thing about contact poses is usually you can duplicate them. But as I did in this one, I went ahead and drew all my poses in Illustrator using the digital tools that Professor Davila and I kind of talked about, using kind of that brush stroke. And I went ahead and just cut and paste them into Animate. As simple as that. So Control C or Command C, Command V, right onto the keyframe, boom, picture 1. I go down to the next frame, boom, picture 2, and so forth. So the trick here is just trying to make sure all your layers kind of stay in the same place. And it's going to take some tweaking. So if I go back to the scene here, and let's go ahead and remove that tween. So I have my character. You can see he's walking in place. Now, if I want to translate that across the screen, as you saw, I have roughly about 5 frames. So I know one essential step is about 5 to 6 frames. This frame essentially would be the starting contact. So I have 5 to 6 frames here. So what I did was I said, okay, that would be, if one step is 5 frames, 15 would be roughly 3 steps. So how far would this character gait, so to speak, and a gait is the length of our steps, how far would this way would this be? So again, I was like, okay, well, that would be one step, 2 step, 3 step, boom. So our character would end roughly around here. And that's where I got my my kind of feel for it. I don't know why that's popping up, but there we go. All right. So to do this, I simply made 15 frames. I right click anywhere on the timeline or anywhere on those frames and say create motion tween. I'm not doing a classic tween here. I'm going to do a motion tween. And then it says, do you want to convert them to make sure you're tweened? Well, in this case, I want to make sure actually I'm on the timeline. There we go. I'm going to hit OK. And so now, and actually let me undo that real quick. And I realized I drew my little notes here on the wrong screen. So let's just undo some of those drawings. There we go. Cool. Okay, now I can do this. So I'm going to do a motion tween. There we go. So those little drawings were confusing because they were on the outside of the symbol. So now that I have this going, you can see it still walks in place. It just made it yellow. And this is just like Adobe After Effects if you've used that or Premiere. When I get to a spot that I want, I'm going to move the character. And in this case, I'm going to say, okay, I think our line was somewhere over here. So now we have 1 step, 2 step, 3 step. And look at all those drawings. Isn't that really cool? So let's turn Onion Skin off and watch this and see if there's any sliding. So I'm going to hit return. Nope, our character walks perfectly across the screen. Now it's really imperative, and it's not a lot of math because I'm not really a math person, but if I didn't know these numbers of frames, it would be just trial and error, because otherwise, let's just pull this out and make it 25 seconds. Now it's going to take longer, but you see there's kind of a little backslide now. That's because the numbers don't add up. So, I'm adding way more time, so there's kind of this little weird slowdown happening. The character is literally dragging its feet. Same thing as if I were to go and say, okay, in 10 frames, I want you to go really far. It's not as noticeable, but there's definitely a little bit of sliding there. So you're better off undershooting it than overshooting it. In this case, I know it's roughly about 15 to 16 frames. Anywhere above that, I'm going to get a little bit of weirdness. And so if I did want to go to 25 frames per se, I know that my character actually would probably be over here by then. So if I hit return, all good. He's going there pretty decently. So again, that's using a graphic symbol. In this case, I kind of have a varied timing here. Just kind of holds the first pose. But at any point, you can kind of adjust this to your liking. So if there needed to be more pictures here, if you're kind of holding, you can always then go back and it will update it for you. And you can see it's getting even a little smoother with that extra frame. So the more frames we have inside the actual drawings, the longer and the better it's going to be. So again, let's just go on 2s here. Let's see what this looks like. So I'm getting a little more sliding. So at that point, I usually kind of see what happens if I speed it up. There we go. That looks pretty smooth. And the character is doing its thing. So really kind of a neat technique. Again, you want to avoid sliding. You can see it's in here. It's right there, actually, between those frames. Some people will actually try to manually adjust it, which can work, right? Sometimes just a little, when you see it's this one's not too off. Right there, it's off. Turn on our onion skin. I can see on my heel. Take off onion skinning. So you can see you can fix these. It's just, it becomes a pain in the butt if you don't get your timing right. All right, so that is another way to do it using nesting. So you have this way. So if we look at them both with each other here, you have this way, which is just kind of our character just walking right off of the line and us animating down a path. And then we have this way, that's the more kind of I'm walking in place doing my thing. Now, how does this relate to maybe video games? Well, in video games, there's a thing called sprites, which are just a bunch of drawings of the character in multiple different either walking poses, attack poses, and so forth. So I thought it'd be apropos to use one of the most famous characters of all time, which is Mario. and we're going to use a 3-second sprite, a 3-frame sprite of Mario. So we're going to use our contact passing contact. And to do this, I went ahead and grabbed a couple pictures of Mario and I put them in a Photoshop file. So to this point, we really haven't discussed in major detail how to get a Photoshop file into Animate. So let's go ahead and do that. So in our library, we can go ahead and either add a new symbol or we can load different things, but we're going to go to import to library. I'm going to go and find my PSD, which is labeled Mario. And then when it opens, it gives me this kind of setup. So it's asking me, okay, you have 3 layers into this scene. Great. They're bitmaps, so these aren't vectors, so they're going to be a little funky looking. It asks me, do I want to flatten them in case these were layered at all, or grouped, I should say. And then I'm going to go ahead and make a movie clip, and I'm going to call it Mario Walk MC for movie clip. Again, we don't really have to use, we can convert the movie clip even, so it doesn't really matter. But we can turn this on or we can turn this off. So actually, let's turn that off and let's see what happens. All right, so now that we have everything in, we're going to hit OK. It's asking, would you like to convert? Would you like to convert them to keyframes? I think keyframes would be the way I'd like to go. So just to kind of keep that, moving, and I'm going to hit import. All right, so now what this has done, because we didn't check movie clip, it actually gave us a PSD, right? It made it its own little kind of file, and then it has those different keyframes for the different pictures. So if I double click on this, here we go, and it just gives us a little background layer. That's okay. But now we have our character. Now our character is moving, so we want to make sure we stack them up on top of each other. But let's go ahead before we dive into there and let's put them into our scene. So I went ahead and made a layer for Mario here, and I'm going to eyeball these off and lock them. And I'm going to go ahead and put the Mario clip from my library, Mario PSD, onto my stage. There's Mario. Cool. Love movie clips because you can scale them up. It looks really bad because I'm throwing an image into a vector program. So ideally I would build that in vector, but that's all good. So if I don't want this to be a movie clip, I can simply change this to a graphic. Again, like I talked about in my first lesson, I really love graphic symbols just so I can see my movement, and it makes it a little easier. So if I double click in this, I go into my scene, and what I want to do now is I'm actually just going to turn on my onion skin, and I want so this is my contact position. I want my character to be on top of each other. So as easy as that, I'm going to just put them on top. So it's going to kind of cycle through that file. Simple as that, y'all. We'll go back to scene 1 here, and let's see what it does. Pretty cool, right? All right, so we want Mario to translate left to right. So let's take the walk cycle loop and motion clip that we did. Now he has 3 frames per step. His gait isn't too big. So we can imagine, let's estimate 1, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21. So it's going to take about 21 steps or so to get him across the screen. And we know that 21 steps, 3, we're going to go ahead and add that motion tween. Go to around 21. Moving forward. I dig it. Here goes Mario. Now, obviously, I probably want to go ahead and do some timeline management here. Highlight these frames. I'm going to hold my shift key. Highlight one frame, hold shift. Pardon me, my control key. And I'm going to delete these frames. Right click, remove frames. All right, there we go. It's a little easier for us to see. So you can see, again, as long as you have the appropriate math in your head, it should be able to work. And all of this, again, stems back from that reference. Mario has a contact, a passing, and a contact. In this case, we have it lasting for 3 seconds. We could add more drawings in there if we'd like, but you need at least 3 drawings to kind of make it believable and go from there. So these are all kind of different ways to do this. Now, I went ahead and downloaded Chris Georginas is one of the kind of amazing animators that uses Adobe Animate and Flash. So if you ever get your hands on any of his resources, please go ahead and do that. But I went ahead and downloaded one of his characters, and we're going to play with the walk cycle here. And you can see this character. Let's remove this tween real quick. This is let's see how he built it. So first let's play his character. So this is a character with appeal, but this is a unique one. What he did was he most likely drew an animation, but then he created a puppet within Adobe Animate. So let's look at how he built this puppet. So as you can see, it's a graphic symbol, just like we did for Mario, just like we did for the Preston Blair homage kind of walk cycle. If we double click in a puppet, look at all this. So now let's check out what he did. He created layers, and this is something you may want to do, where he puts his anchor point kind of where the joint would be. So if we grab this arm, for instance, this now rotates. Look at that. It rotates from that specific joint. And then I just broke my elbow there a little bit, but he goes ahead, and in this case, he's using classic tweens to do this. So he has 2 steps. This character is walking on 12s, but you can see it has a lot of personality. So you could build a puppet, and it is a really great way to kind of work within layers. So giving this a shot is super important. You can see when we have that arm kind of break back here, you could go in and all I'm doing is manipulating these layers, just kind of rotating them. I can have it hold a little bit more. You can do all of this. So again, all of these are just individual pieces, almost like a puppet that he built together, and he kind of went through and worked them with one another. So if we click on there we go, upper arm there. He has some easing in there. He's playing with like some of the classic effects in Animate, but overall, these just kind of work together. So kind of a neat thing you may want to explore as well. But just to prove that our technique does work, we know it's about 24 frames a second. So if we do that old motion tween here, and we go, okay, so he'll take about 2 steps, roughly about here. And I think it takes him about maybe 4 steps or so to get across the screen. And I move him across the screen around frame 50 and hit return. Now we have our character walking. Again, if we don't want that character to go that far, let's hit enter to stop our animation. Zoom out of our timeline. Let's make it a little shorter. Let's see what that does. You can see he's moving a little slower now. I can drag this keyframe and say, hey, you know what, make it 90 frames. What does that look like? And there you go. So this element and this method of animation works no matter the file. It's really up to you and your imagination how you want to build your walk. Now, I guarantee I know Chris has experience in doing hand-drawn animation rather than just puppets. But what he's done is made it a lot easier for himself by breaking this character, in this case Illustrator, up into pliable parts. And that's going to make it easier. But he may have actually gone through and did a really rough sketch, going back to ours, maybe that like we did in our one walk number 2. He may have started with that quick pencil sketch just to get the pacing and the timing right. So that's obvious that you can do it either way. So just to kind of show you some of the cool things you can do is like adjust this character's color. There's like a shadow that he put on. Awesome stuff. So those are the basics of walk cycles. The idea is, theory over the technology. There's always a way to get around the technology, and especially know that any of these methods can be translated into multiple outputs, whether, like I said, that's film, TV, video games, you name it. And then especially the next class after intro for most is intermediate animation. we get to play with this kind of technique using a 3D software like Autodesk Maya, which is rather fun. All right, everybody, I hope you learned a little bit about walk cycles today, and I can't wait to see your walk with personality. Thanks.